We're live.
We're fine.
Oh, now we're live.
Oh, great. Now we're up. Boy.
But I think people would have appreciated learning that woodchucks are groundhogs.
Exactly.
And that garbanzo beans are chickpeas. I think that's useful information.
Wait, do you prefer garbanzo or chickpea? Which one do you grow up saying, Arvin?
I actually prefer chickpea and groundhog because I think those are just like.
Yeah,
those are the
I'm
words.
With you. I absolutely agree.
Chickpea and groundhog.
It's so punchy. It's such a good word, chickpea. Garbanzo. I'm like, that's so dramatic. Who is she?
Yeah.
Who is she?
And woodchuck just sounds annoying. Like woodchuck. Whereas groundhog is like, I would hang out with the groundhog. You know?
Yeah. Oh hell yeah! I would totally hang out. Are they? Can you get rabies from groundhog? Is it like one of those kind of animals? I love how we've completely taken over.
I keep my 6 feet, but I'd hang out with him outdoors and 6 feet apart.
Okay, good. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Please take the reins from us, Aaron.
No, we should change it, right? Like we should become zoologists or bean experts and, just make that the whole talk.
Like over the course of this, we will become the experts? Because I'm not an expert currently because I didn't know groundhogs.
I mean, I can spend the next hour on Wikipedia and get back to you all with some information. And that would be related,
Perfect segue to how it look at that. It's beautiful.
And how it all blew up. 17-year-old edits. Yeah, no. We'll get to that. But first I want to say sorry to everyone who had to go through that. It's fine. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Shop Talk, Marginalized Creators on Craft. My name is Aaron H. Aceves, and my pronouns are he, him. I am the author of This Is Why They Hate Us, a young adult novel coming spring 2022 from Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. This Is Why They Hate Us is a story of 17-year-old Enrique who tries to use the summer after his junior year to get over his feelings for his best friend, Salim. I'm your moderator for tonight, and I'm super excited and super happy to be talking with Arvin Ahmadi and Mark Oshiro. I'm going to share, after their introductions, the reason why I feel like a lot of things in my life are like cosmic and like, fate or whatever. And the fact that it's two of you, I will talk about that later. But first, let me introduce Arvin Ahmadi, pronouns he, him, his. Grew up outside Washington, D.C. He graduated from Columbia University and has worked in the tech industry. When he's not reading or writing books, he can be found watching late-night talk show interviews and editing Wikipedia pages. His previous novels include Down and Across and Girl Gone Viral. His most recent novel, How It All Blew Up, is on sale now. I hear that Alan Cummings is a fan. Hello, Arvin.
Hello, Aaron. Hi.
Thank you for
exciting to be here virtually.
Yes. And our other lovely panelist is Mark Oshiro, pronouns they, them, their. Mark Oshiro is the award-winning author of Anger is a Gift, the 2019 Schneider Family Book Award winner, and Each of Us a Desert, both with Tor Teen. Their middle grade debut, The Insiders, is out in 2021. I really wish I could have read that ahead of time, but...
Well, I barely finished it like maybe 10 days ago, so it's okay.
That is why I did not read it.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to read your middle grade because I'm very excited about that. But yeah, that's coming 2021. When not writing, they run the online Mark Does Stuff universe, and they are probably trying to pet every dog in the world. Or they are going to pet every dog in the world. I believe in you.
It's very probable. It's very probable.
So thank you guys. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Arvin, for coming. The reason I'm again, the cosmic weird thing is that I saw you guys on a panel, like an in-person panel. Remember that? I saw you guys on an in-person panel a while back. It might have been this year. It might have been 20 years ago. I don't really know.
Books are magic.
Books are magic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
with Case and Calendar.
Was that? Right. Yeah. No. Yeah.
That was last year.
Yeah.
Thank God. Yeah, because that felt somehow. Anyway, but I talked to you two after, and I was in the middle of doing a revise and resubmit because I was on submission with my book, and I was talking to you guys, and like I was just like, oh, I don't know what to do, blah blah blah, and then like just by like talking it out with you guys, like I think like Mark repeated something that I had said to them, and like it sort of like clicked for me, and I think you guys like both saw like in my eyes, I was like, I need to leave right now so I can go like fix this shit. But that was like a major breakthrough, and like you two were like both there for that, and like that it's just so I'm like very, very thankful that you two are doing this and that you are here tonight.
Wonderful.
And I remember that conversation so well, actually, and it's funny because I remember the pain points that you had brought up. I don't remember the solution, but whatever you said, Mark, I mean, I guess you're the one that like sparked it. It worked, because this is why they hate us, which I keep telling you this, Aaron, but like, I love the title. I'm so glad that you like
it's so good.
Your guns with that title, because you know it's a punchy title, and I imagine maybe you got some pushback, but it's so good, so good.
Well, I'm kind of still currently getting pushback, but that's for another time.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about your work. I'm really interested in obviously all of your guys' work, but your most recent works. So, Mark, I've been reading Each of Us a Desert, and this is the beautiful cover right here. And I
love it too.
As I was reading it, I was sort of like, there's no way you sort of like, I mean, unless you're this amazing, but it's also not about that. It's about the writer life. But there's no way you sort of sat down and just wrote this book. I feel like there were parts of it, seeds, barely anything, that have been sort of like percolating in your mind for years before I think you sat down to write it. That's just the sense that I got, because it's so intricate and like world buildy, if that's a word. And so like I know like it must have like ahead of time you must have been getting like weird little things that didn't quite match up, and then eventually when you sat down and write the book, they sort of came together. And then Arvin, because How It All Blew Up, another great cover. It's so personal and it's so intimate. Like I'm guessing again, like before you sat down to write this book, there were things that you have been thinking about for years before you sort of got down to it. And so I'm wondering if you guys can talk about all the stray little seeds that came together to make these books.
Yeah, I love that you're not wrong, but you're also so far off from how it actually came together, because you are right. There are things in this book that I've been thinking about for years, or little pieces. Like I keep a little thing in my notes app on my phone. That's every little idea, image, stuff, like random stuff that comes in my head. There are multiple things that I pulled from that made a part of the story. And some of those were like 6-7 years old. So that is true. That being said, I did a panel recently where I was with a bunch of fantasy authors, and they were all, we get the world building question. How did you world build and all this? And they're all talking about all of these intricate things. Like I wrote a world Bible. I thought of this thing and then built the world out from this one detail, whatever. And I purposely went last because I was like, I cannot give this answer first because they're all going to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? My answer is I did world building literally last. It was the last thing I did. All of the world came together in one fever pitch brainstorm session with my editor, Miriam Weinberg. I had already rewritten the novel twice. I'd already rewritten it once and had to rewrite it again because it just was not a good book. So I came up with the story first and then built a world around the people. Which is apparently what you're not supposed to do in fantasy. You're supposed to think of the world and all of its intricate details and how it functions and governments and food and all that stuff. I'm like, no, I didn't do that. I did that at the very end. And it wasn't until that last draft that all of the pieces came together. That being said, I think that's why the story is as emotional as it is because I devised a world for these two people. And while there are now multiple stories and multiple characters or whatever, the whole journey had to be what the two of them went on. And so I built a world around that. So it was hard. I mean, my first book's contemporary. My next YA book and my next middle grade book are both contemporary too. I feel very comfortable writing contemporary. This was super hard. Kind of don't recommend it to most people. It's hard. Like when you get a note that's like, why does everyone wear this type of clothing? And you're like, I don't know. who cares? And you're like, you really do have to think of those things if you're going to commit to secondary world. I think emotionally the story has been a long time coming, and wanting to write a story about loneliness and being queer and wishing that there was someone out there for you who understood you and could love you. That has been brewing a long time. I never thought I would write a fantasy book, just straight up. Never thought I would do it. I'm more of a science fiction, horror, speculative fiction. Like, that's my realm. But here we are. It happened.
Yeah, but I love that, because I think the kind of like speculative fantasy that will sometimes work for me is when the focus is that emotional truth. And, you know, the world has to be in order and make sense, but I'm never going to be one of those readers that like nitpicks world building or particularly falls in love with world building. It's the characters, the story, that emotional truth. And I think that also is just kind of like a contemporary mindset. Like when you think about world building, like what is like one of the main structures of our world, for example, it's time. And you hear contemporary authors all the time be like, oh, right, I didn't realize that like I have everything in my book happens on a Thursday. And it wasn't until my copy editor told me that I only ever talk about Thursdays. Like, we suck at timeline. Yep. We suck at describing people. Like, I just think that like for a lot of contemporary writers, it's like we care about dialogue. We care about emotional truth. We care about like stakes and plots and characters and backstory. When it comes to the actual world, a lot of times that comes secondary, or it just happens to be what we know. So that's how I write my books. It's always some kind of a world that I have lived in for a while or visited or done some amount of research on. But I really won't like fine tune the details until the very end. I mean, I want to have some familiarity with it when I start the book. But that's just to kind of like provide the necessary scaffolding for my character to like explore themselves and come to that emotional truth, or that thing they struggle with that they need to come face to face with the truth of. So I'm with you, Mark. And it's funny because the one time I did Speculative a Shot, I had the exact same issue where I didn't do any world building until the very end, I think.
Oh, good. That's comforting.
yeah. But that actually, I'm surprised that because that's hard. When I wrote a near futuristic book and then was like, oh, wait, I actually have to like flesh out this world and describe events that had happened and the way that these futuristic things are and function. That's when I was like, no, I'm out. Like, this isn't happening again.
I think it's also hard because I think, generally speaking, exposition is easier in contemporary. I think it's so much easier to fold in things that already happen because a reader comes into it and knows the basic stuff. And the thing I struggled with is what you're talking about. How do you talk about things that already happened that are relevant to the story without doing, like, I don't know if you've ever read a fantasy book and you hit the like wall of text, the like 20 or 30 pages where it's just some means of explaining the world or whatever. And I was like, I can't do that. I cannot write that. I will be bored through it. I know my readers will be bored going through that. And so I found that part of it to be the most daunting of everything. I was like, look, I can fudge the details. Who cares? If I write a good enough story, maybe they won't look at the world building. But when it came to exposition, I was like, how? And so I had to go out and read other fantasy books and be like, how did you do this? Like, how? I read a lot of like Kirsten White. She's so good at it. Kirsten White, N.K. Jemisin, like reading people and seeing how they reveal information and finding out that there's ways to do it in ways that trick you, that you don't even realize the exposition happened. And that was like, I had to use other people's writing as a guide.
It really does take, I think, an extra level of savvy, because like to exist in a world, like in the same world as someone else, is to share a language, right? And when you share a language, you can go that much deeper on like a connection level. And so, I mean, I think that's why I not only do I prefer contemporary, but I think I am extra lazy and extra unsavvy when it comes to contemporary and wanting to create that connection with the reader, because I'm a pop culture slut. I'm a pop culture slut too.
Or both. You could be both.
That's snobby slut.
Yeah. I like my highbrow and lowbrow references.
That's like a whole thing throughout how it all blew up is like what counts as popular culture? What are the things that we enjoy? What things do I personally enjoy? And also maybe this person came before, but I don't fucking know who they are. Like, who is this person? Like, and that's something, especially as queer people, we go through as well. So many of us weren't exposed to the greats because they weren't allowed. Like, and so for some people, Carly Rae Jepsen, who isn't even queer themselves, like that's their first inroad into like pop music, like, and it's, you got to respect where people come into that.
Wait, remind us your middle grade book title.
The Insiders.
That's what I thought. Okay, yeah, because it does, and I wonder if this plays into it at all. That like once you are allowed inside that club, it's just like I just feel like you are outside for so long because you're not allowed, because you're scared to enter that world. But once someone either lets you in or you let yourself in, it's just like it is a world of references and lingo and experiences that you share. That just it's like a shortcut. You have all these shortcuts all of a sudden to get to like real connection that much faster.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I guess that is what an insider is, right? Like someone who knows things and it doesn't have to dig because they're just there. So I think that's why I like contemporary, because like you're able to establish that connection faster and more easily with the reader. And I think then contemporary can like, it can obviously like get smart and interesting and creative in other ways. But I have so much respect for fantasy writers who are willing to do the work and in such, like you said, like creative, savvy, sneaky ways to establish that shared language so that then you can go to that connection level.
Yeah.
Awesome. You guys can, I'm just going to sit back and drink my wine.
I only paused because I was like, oh, you asked a question and it took us 10 minutes to answer it. And I was like, did we just talk over Aaron?
Arvin hasn't really answered yet.
Technically, I guess not.
Yeah.
Oh, did I not?
I love it. I guess, no, you kind of did.
Yeah, like, what was the question again?
It was just about like, a lot of the stuff you write about and how it all blew up must have been brewing for a while, and like where you were getting the beginnings of it. Like you're like, oh, I know I'm not writing this book now, but like I'm setting this aside.
Which is literally a conversation I had with you, Arvin, years ago. You told me about this book a long time ago, and a lot of what you were communicating to me was like, I'm not ready for it. Which I think is like a really interesting thing as a creator, like as an artist, knowing you have an idea, but being like, I can't execute it yet. I gotta wait. Like I gotta get more things under my belt. I gotta do more. And you did. And then you knocked it out of the park, Arvin. Like this book is so good.
I thought it was gonna be an adult book. I thought I was gonna wait until I was more out, whatever that meant. I was like, maybe someday when I'm married and have kids, I will write this like coming out black male story, because that's kind of when I have no choice but to kind of like I guess advertise this thing. But I thought I needed to keep close to myself. But I mean, then I went to Rome and met the people in the book. I mean, that's what sparked how it all blew up. It was the events as they transpire in the book in Italy, and the people in there, namely Jahan and Neil, like the tutor and the Iranian queer poet role model character. They were real people, and real people who helped me come into my queer identity and kind of learn to be louder and prouder about it. I mean, I think I would have always said that I was proud of being gay, but I think there's an extra level of pride when you're prepared to scream about it, and aren't scared, or don't feel like you have to be scared. Because I just like, I think of teens today and like how scared a lot of them feel. And like, it's so merited in so many cases, because it's safety and it's lack of privilege and it's all these things. But I think I had reached a point where I looked at my life and I was like, I can do this, and not only that, but I want to do this. And that's how it all blew up, was born. So you're right, Aaron. I think the story was there for a long ass time, but it wasn't until the story, or the last part of the story, happened to me that I like felt like I had the tools to put it in a book.
Awesome. Okay, so now our next topic is very sexy, so prepare yourselves. Let's talk about point of view and person. So I remember reading Anger is a Gift, and well, I'm sure anyone who's watching this is very into, young adult literature. And the format it's in right now, it's like it's more often than not, first person. A lot of it's present tense, right? Like there's some sort of category wide, givens, right? Like it's usually first person. So I remember when reading Anger is a Gift, I was like, oh, this Mark person like is writing in third, and I don't remember if it's present or past.
It's past.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it's a close third in past tense.
Yeah, and I was like, huh, that's interesting, because it goes against like what the category typically does, and then in Each of Us a Desert, it's actually in first person present, but
technically it's not.
Oh, it's past. It's first person past.
It's first person past and present and second person.
Yes,
and it slips into second person
and third.
Weirdly,
some parts are in third. Too.
Oh, God, some parts are in third. I forgot about that. I forgot my own book, and I wrote it, but whatever.
So this is why I wanted to talk about this, because obviously, Mark, you do a lot with that, and then Arvin is the bread and butter of YA. You're doing a lot of first person, but I'm wondering, Arvin, if at any point you were like, oh, this should maybe be in third, and you know the switch, or like how you figured out like actually no, like this works best in this way. And I'm someone who also like first person is like my safety jacket, and I'm like I'm not doing anything else. But yeah, I'm wondering if you guys can talk sort of through the processes for Mark for both of your books and Arvin for your 3, like the process of going through what's best for this book in terms of person and point of view.
Right.
I think when I write in third person, I just try too hard. You know, like I feel like it's that once upon a time there was way of writing where I just feel like I need to be a real writer all of a sudden and write seriously. And those aren't the books that I enjoy reading, and those aren't the books that I enjoy writing and, you know, being in, existing in for the long haul. So I stick to first because first feels more confessional. It's all internal monologue. Or like it's just so much more friendly to internal monologues and internal freakouts and little, you know, jokes to yourself and things like that. I mean, I know this is another kind of like case where there are writers out there who can do so much with the third person and give so much voice to the third person and have so much fun with the third person. I just haven't found that to be the case for me. When I attempt to write in the third person, I get serious. I get like wannabe literary, and I'm just like, bitch, you're not trying to win a Pulitzer. Calm down. So yeah, I mean, for now, first person is really like it's what I enjoy the most, and I think it's how I feel closest to the characters. But you know, maybe someday in the future, I did try to write. I think I wrote the entire first draft of Girl Gone Viral in the third person, and I mean that's the thing. It's just like Opal, the main character. When I went back and read it, and when my agent also went back and read it, it was like there wasn't that emotional connection, you know? And I think I was able to better establish the emotional stakes when I went back and rewrote it in the first person, which I don't recommend, even though I feel like so many authors do that at some point in their careers that it's like a rite of passage at this point to like write a book entirely in one POV and then go back and rewrite it in another. But still, don't do it if you don't have to.
Well, I don't have that problem. I've always written in the point of view that it ended up being. My problem is I write in the wrong genre every single time.
Right.
Literally, 3 books in, every single one, Anger's a Gift, Each of Us a Desert, and The Insiders, the genre always started out different. And the big change was I changed genres. So, you know, I mean, and this sort of speaks to your question, Aaron, which is that I came from reading so much science fiction and horror, and there's something you can do with that slightly detached third person that is so much fun, where you can give insight into the character, but then you can just stretch out a little bit and show things that are happening outside. And so Anger's a Gift was always third person. Actually, up until that point, I had almost never written anything in first person because the opposite of you, I was terrified by first person because I didn't know how to. At least I didn't think I knew how to write a voicey first person narrative. I was so used to giving voice to third person that I felt like I did not have that muscle. I didn't know what I was doing, so I just tended to go for third person because I thought it was more comfortable. And so Anger, I just wanted it to have this like epic, almost like literary feel to it, and third person just worked. But then with Each of Us a Desert, I knew from the beginning, even when it was a vastly different story, I knew it needed to be personal. And I also like consciously was like, I want to challenge myself. I do not want my first book to be anything like my second, or my second book to be anything like my first one. So this was always in first person. And It was so dry. That was the main complaint my editor had for the first draft of Each of Us a Desert. She's like, I can tell you are so used to third person and you're trying out first person and your character is just narrating. Your character's not alive. Your character is not a full person yet. They're just telling the story and you need more. And you need more in the book, and also the book is in the wrong genre. I think it's actually fantasy. Have fun, Mark. Rewrite the whole thing. So the voice did not hit. I'm not even kidding you. Literally, it was that third draft. I rewrote it once, turned it in, had to rewrite it a second time. And that second rewrite is when the fantasy fell together. And then the very complicated, ambitious decision I made to not only have it all be in first person, but that the entire book is a single prayer. That I was sitting across from my editor and I was like, there's a glue missing to hold this whole story together. And I remembered last week what it was she said that triggered her. She said, why is she telling this story? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, she's a character who's obsessed with stories. So why is she telling her own? And I just sat there and I was like, damn, that's one of those like editor questions that just, you're like, what do I do? Like, how do I react to that? How am I ever going to figure out what that is? And I was sitting there, she was talking about something else, and I just stopped her, and I just looked at her, and I said, the whole book is a prayer. And she was like, oh, because it's a world, and like, we then very quickly, I just assembled this like very rough outline. Like, if she does this, then she needs to be able to address her God. So I think I'm going to make it first and second person. And then I also want the actual story she takes to be in there. So that's where the short story idea, those were never in any draft. Literally all of it came together in one lunch meeting with my editor. And then I rewrote the entire book in, I'm not even kidding you, like 30 days. Like it just flew out of me because every other time I struggled. It took 7 months to write the first draft. The first rewrite I did took forever, and this one didn't because I was like, oh, I have a framing device. And so I actually found that picking this very specific point of view made it very easy for me to figure out what she was going to say. Because if she's praying to her God, that takes care of exposition. She doesn't need to explain to her God who her God is. Why would she do that? That doesn't make any sense. So I suddenly was like, oh, okay, as long as it makes sense why she's repeating something or referencing the past, great. And then the little short stories that she takes out of people's bodies, I'm like, oh, they're flashbacks. Like, that's literally what they are. But a person reading it isn't going to sit and be like, oh, it's flashback time. They're like, oh, wait, now I get to know someone's secret. But for me as a storyteller, I'm like, oh, I love flashbacks so much. I love them a lot. That's why I loved Lost, even though it was a kind of trashy show. I loved it because I love having a character and then you learn something about them and it changes their context of who they are and whatnot. But I agree with you, Arvin. I don't recommend writing it wrong, so terribly wrong the first time, because that whole book rewrite is, they're tough. They're really tough.
Yeah, but you have to go with your gut. And so that's, like when you come up with that like brilliant framing device and you can't stop thinking about it, it's like you keep, I'm sure the first couple of days you were like, fuck, no, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, no, constantly.
Like, it doesn't need to be like, and then you're like, okay. Like, yeah.
I also can't imagine Girl Gone Viral being third. Like, I literally cannot picture the book. It can't, like, it just doesn't, I don't know. Which I think speaks to, like, you figured out how the story needed to be told.
Yeah. Yeah, and once I wrote a line of it in the first person, I was like, oh, like, I could try to ignore that line that I written in the first person, but I just knew that it would like haunt me for days and weeks to come as the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I just blanked out there. So Arvin, I've heard you talk about How It All Blew Up a lot because I was watching all of your launch events because I had nothing else to do, and also because I was very excited about the book. But you talked about how originally you wrote it as a monologue, all from Amir's perspective. But when you read the finished version, you have perspectives from Amir's parents, his mother and his father, and his sister, his younger sister. And so I was wondering, this is part of the conversation we just had, like sort of when you realized, oh, I need these other perspectives in here. And, the task of like why this person is going at this certain time So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty early on because I wrote it from my perspective because that was how I experienced the story, and also because the book that inspired that format was written from one point of view. So the book that inspired the monologue format and how it all blew up, it's called The Reluctant Fundamentalist. It's by Mohsen Hamid, who's a brilliant British Pakistani writer, yeah, I mean, I had read that book and was obsessed with it for a while because it was like entirely narrated by the narrator. It was entirely sort of a story told from the narrator to a man that he meets in a cafe, and he kind of like just speaks for 200 pages. And so that's what I wanted Amir to do, because I fell in love also with the idea that like Amir, who feels so outside of his Persian culture because he is gay, is telling this story out loud, and all of a sudden realizes he's participating in one of the most Persian traditions there is, the tradition of oral storytelling. So, I mean, that was the core emotional truth that I wanted to get to, is that being gay did not detract from his Persianness, that he could be all of these things in one breath, much like his role model that he meets in Italy. But, I mean, coming out don't exist in a vacuum, right? And so as I was writing this story and talking about how he left his family, but then they find him there and how they find him there, I was writing little snippets of like what they would have said in the other interrogation rooms. And so after a couple of those snippets, I was like, wait a minute, this needs to be part of the book, but I don't want to ruin my flow. So it was one of those, like, I continued to write it the way that I had originally planned, but, had those snippets in the back of my head to like expand upon later. And I think that happens, right? I mean, Mark, I'm curious to hear if you've had this experience too, where like you have a brilliant revision idea and it's like going to be quite a big change, but you don't want to mess with the flow that you have, and so you kind of like tuck it away for later.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting hearing you talk about this, because one of the things I loved about all the asides from the other family members is how you use them to introduce tension, both emotional tension and then like literal tension as you're reading it, because sometimes they will say things that reveal things about Amir that you're like, wait, he did what? Wait, this thing happened too? And you have and of course the whole book you have the mystery of what happened on the plane. Like, and I loved getting those little moments to remind the reader, like, just like you said, what he did had massive ramifications for himself, but it also had me to see that stuff. But yeah, I think it's hard because I know exactly the thing I want to talk about, Arvin, but it's a huge spoiler. So I will just say the poems in the book is an idea that I had actually been kicking around for years. Is I wanted like in-book poetry to be part of a plot point, and this is the book in which I pulled it off. But it was so hard. This is the first book I ever tried to do like an intricate set of interlocking mysteries. And again, I don't recommend it if you're not into the incredible work of like, because it's work. You have to sit and be able to look at a story as a whole, like as a giant puzzle. And how do you weave something so that the information is there and the reader doesn't feel cheated when the reveal happens? Because that sucks when you get to a big plot twist and you're like, but like I would say it sucks, because sometimes it's good when it's a plot twist you've never seen coming because it's just a clever twist or whatever. But I meant like if you have something that's a mystery and then it's resolved and then you're like, wait, there were no clues to it, and you go back and you're like, there were no hints, you feel cheated. But then you also feel bad if it's extremely obvious. So that was the thing, is threading in this mystery of these poems that the main character Sochil finds in the desert, and the weird magic that she feels when she's drawn to them, and how much she feels like they understand her. And so there's this, it's not a main mystery, but it is a mystery of who wrote them and why are they, where are they? And it's part of a greater part of the story. I also did something, at least I attempted something different, which is that I don't think it's a super well hidden mystery. I actually think it's kind of obvious. So then I secretly plotted an even worse one that I love, because people will have been tweeting at me or like tagging me on Instagram, and they're like, I was so concerned with the main thing that I never saw the later plot twist coming at all. And I was like, okay, good. Then I did my job. That was what I wanted. So, but that's man, I don't get like, I have I have immense respect for fantasy writers now. I also have immense respect for like mystery and thriller writers.
The Karen McManus's, right?
That shit is hard. It's so hard. Like I've sat and talked with Tiffany Jackson so many times about how you plot to have that moment happen and how you can have this reveal that like makes you want to throw a book across the room, because there's one in every single one of her books. Like, and it's such an amazing ability to be able to understand plot and pacing to pull something off. So yeah, that was I attempted something like not that level, but you know.
Cool. God, I don't know. I really loved. I love all of your guys' work. That's not like a surprise to me, but like I just, I'm like, no, because I really liked your most recent books, but then also like I was like, well, duh, you like their previous stuff. But anyway, I have a question that we hardly ever talk about it, or I guess maybe some people do. I don't know, but I never really heard anyone talk about it, and it's length. Let's talk about length, guys.
Did you say length or life?
Let's talk about life.
I swear. Wait, which one?
Length.
Okay. I thought you were saying. I'm like, let's talk about life, you guys.
It's life coach time. We're gonna get some life advice.
Because we'll need. All right.
Yeah.
I'll take all the life advice possible, but let's talk about length. So I'm wondering a couple things in this regard. So I'm in a debut group, obviously, for like 2022, and like we recently started talking about stuff that was like I was nerding out because I never talked about it with anyone, which is like, are you an underwriter or an overwriter, right? Like, is the editing process injecting stuff into your story, or is it paring it down and like cutting things out? Do you think about word count? Do you think about page count? Do you think about how many chapters and the length of the chapters? And then also, it's interesting so Mark, you write a lot. Like both of your books are like,
but not intended. I thought I overwrote both books, and both of them were edited up.
Interesting.
Like the original draft of Anger is a Gift was about 100,000, and I was like, that's too long for contemporary. We're gonna have to cut. And the final version is 126, which is longer than most fantasy books. Like, but I also am like at a point where I get why it happened, and I get why we made that choice, like artistically. The first draft of Each of Us a Desert was 80. I was like, I don't want to write a long book again. 80, and then it got edited up to 106. Like, so I guess I technically underwrite, but I still think I write long. Like, I think I tend to write long.
You're an above average underwriter.
A very above average underwriter.
Yeah.
So,
I do underwrite, but that means my first drafts are like 35-ish.
Oh my god.
Oh my god. I wish
50, and then the final will be 50 to 70.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I just like I need short books. I need to write short books. I need to read short books. I just like my brain cannot stick with a long book, both as a reader and a writer. And so, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because I think one of the pieces of feedback I've seen for how it all blew up is like, and it's really kind of people to kind of phrase like this is like, I would have wanted more. From the characters and really from the family members, from Amir. But I just, and I it's funny because with every book I have a straps folder that's like as long, if not longer, than the manuscript itself, with just everything that I had deleted. But I know myself, and I know that I will naturally go off on tangents and kind of get really distracted. I mean, I'm like that when I speak because speaking is just a first draft in your brain. And so I make a really conscious choice when I write to write efficiently, and like think about kind of like not writing really long chapters or really long scenes of dialogue or giving too much information. Like I try not to ever kind of like break from a scene for more than a couple paragraphs for like an aside or a flashback or something like that. And so, yeah, I'm very length conscious because I know I know how I am as a reader. And I know that a lot of readers out there can take it. Like they want, like a lot of readers want those, like, I didn't mean like that, Aaron. They want like Mark Oshiro tomes. But
I don't want to write them anymore. Like getting to write middle grade, I was like, oh my god, it gets to be short. Like the first draft of the Insiders, I thought was too long. It was like 49, but I was like, it was so great to be like, this is the book. Like I could tell a book short, and it's great. It's in and done. Like you're just done. Like,
and sure, some people will say, like, oh, I wish it were longer, but you know what? There will be so many readers who maybe wouldn't have finished it if it were that longer book that exists in an alternate universe. And I was certainly like, I just know that I like not finishing books in high school was so much reason that I quit reading for a long ass time. And so I don't want to give that experience to kids today.
Yeah. I think with Anger is a Gift, I wasn't necessarily conscious of length. I was conscious of chapter length though, because I had heard the adage like, a good, upper YA or adult book, every chapter should be between like 4,000 to 7,000 words. Like 5,000 is the sweet spot. I don't know who told me that. I don't think that's right at all. But I heard it a lot. Like I think it was in a writing group I was in before the book was, before I even had an agent. And so Anger is a Gift has fairly even chapters. They're about 4,000 to 6,000 words a piece. And then, of course, because I had to make everything difficult, I was like, screw that. I don't want to do that ever again. And the chapter length in each of us at Desert varies very widely. Like I think the longest chapter is a short story towards the very end that was 7,000 words. My shortest chapter is also in the very end. It is, wait, I'm going to look at it. I know exactly where it is. 4 words. 4 words. It's like, I won't show you what it is, but like those 4 words, that's it. Yeah.
Spoiler.
I have a chapter that's 0 words.
You do? Oh, that was right. You do. It just had Amir's name and then nothing, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah,
about to happen. I hate it.
I was like,
but it's for dramatic effect. I wanted to break things up.
Yeah. I like to keep crazy that day.
I wanted each of us at Desert to move quickly. Like I think one way to make a long book feel shorter is to break things up. So like if you actually counted them out, there are no chapter numbers in each of us at Desert, but I think I got to like 80 or 90 of them. And breaking it up was also easier for me to understand the story too than having these long blocks of text. Everything was like pretty short.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and that's stuff that I don't, unless I'm like with other writers, like no one, or when you're starting out writing, like you don't really, no one tells you stuff, and
yeah,
I guess some people just go with their gut. And there's a website, it's arbookfind.com, and I would like go on there and I would look up all the YA books, and I would just be like, okay, like
word count.
Yeah, I'm like looking for Alaska is like 60,000. I'm like, that's a good thing, but then also like The Hate You Give is like 96 or so. I'm like,
sure. But then if I stay in Dear Martin, like 45.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's.
I've never seen this website.
But you're right. I mean, Aaron, you're right, because I just think it's something that readers don't think about the same way that like I've been dabbling in screenplays lately. And I was talking to a friend about how like the kind of like screenplay rule of thumb is that like 1 page equals 1 minute of screen time. And they were like, oh, whoa, I never like thought about like how a page of screenplay would translate into like maybe an even amount of screen time. Because that's just like, I think as readers, as watchers, we're not really thinking about the mechanics in that way.
Yeah. Cool. I'm glad we got to nerd out about that. So next question, next topic, next whatever. So Mark, we talked about your middle grade. Again, I very much want to read it.
Soon. There'll be a copy ready. There's just not a finished version. Even an art version yet.
I'm just getting the needling in early. But so we talked about your middle grade, The Insiders. And then Arvin, I was, again, like I watched a lot of your launch events, and you were talking about a book for adults. Yeah. And so I always, whenever I have someone, we had Case and Calendar who, did
and middle grade. Yeah. They do it
all 3.
And be like, I'm gonna do all the age groups. But anytime I have people here who are, sort of dabbling in different things, I'm wondering if you can talk about the differences between writing that and like why you chose the age group for, you know, the story that you were telling. You know, like Arvin, I think you said in this interview too, or panel, whatever, that How It All Blew Up was almost, you know, in a book for adults. So if you guys can talk about, you know, the differences and that whole thing.
Did you have a time when you actually decided it was young adult, Arvin? Did you like know, like, yeah, it's got to be a YA book?
For How It All Blew Up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just because I knew Amir was 18 and runs away on his graduation day that it was YA, you know? But I actually don't feel like writing my last 3 books and writing this adult book feel that different. I think I wanted the adult book. At first I struggled because I was trying to write a little more, you know, like I said, this was still in the first person, but like a little more seriously, a little more literary. But there's always a point where I have to kind of like chuck that idea out the door and remember that I just have to write the way that it's fun for me. And fun is always going to be that kind of mixing of like serious and meaty topics, but oftentimes delivered in like a fun, silly, irreverent way. Definitely through a lot of witticism and hijinks and shit. So I'm kind of, I mean, like that's where I think my adult is actually not going to be that different from my YA, aside from the fact that it is about grown-ass adults.
Yeah. I heard for a long time that writing middle grade is easier, and I'm here to report it's not. I actually think middle grade is harder, way harder.
I'm so intimidated by middle grade.
It's way harder.
Yeah.
It's harder, not so much length. I actually didn't have a problem keeping it under a word count and having to take things out. I was delighted by that. But the middle grade voice, you're not cynical as a teenager is. And I kept forgetting that. And a lot of my notes, you know, from Stephanie Stein to HarperCollins were like nudging me, like, okay, you're actually starting to get out of what a 12-year-old boy would think. Which isn't to say that like 12-year-old boys can't think about certain things, but she was like, why is he thinking about this? Why is this his concern? Why is this his anxiety? This sounds like either teenage Mark Oshiro or adult Mark Oshiro writing or guiding, because it was in third person. There were points where I was guiding the story and you could see my hand instead of just letting the story unfold, which is something that a middle grade reader will pick up on immediately. If they feel like they're being like spoon-fed, if they feel like it's being handed to them, they just want to enjoy the story. They don't want someone editorializing it. So I found all of that was very fascinating to do. And I talked about this recently. I think it was a school visit I did. One of the things I did to get in the mindset was to read my junior high school journal. Oh God. Which I was both much messier than I remembered, like way messier. But also what really helped was I was actually way more aware than I ever gave myself credit for. Way more aware about what was going on. Way more aware of like, I never like openly talked about my sexuality, but I would read things and I'm like, that was you getting there, like getting so close to saying it out loud, but just not being able to. Above all that, next month I have a Star Wars short story coming out, which is technically adult. By the way, writing from a creature who doesn't have a language is exceptionally hard, extremely hard. I
feel like hard. You like the challenges.
I do like that. I do. I really like the challenge, even when I think like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? This is so difficult. I could have just wrote a story. I haven't been talking about it often, but we're here. Let's do this. I'm also working on an adult project, an adult thriller. And most of
about that. Sorry, it just came.
Oh, you know about it, Arvin. That's right.
You like?
Oh yeah. Okay. Arvin is one of the only people on the planet. So and I'm working on like right now. I'm like writing things from. There's 2 main characters who all I can say is it's a thriller. It takes place in 24 hours. While they are on lockdown, that's all I'm going to say. I really don't want to talk about anything else. But what I'm doing now is writing from the perspective, because I have not figured out whether it's one point of view or 2. And I can honestly see the book going either way, where it's all from one point of view, or I have to do both of them. And getting into that mindset and writing as an adult is interesting because I don't have to filter myself. I think I notice I'm just a lot more crass in a lot of things. But I realize that this book I'm just going to have to read a lot more adult books to sort of just remind myself, like, because I've always read adult books, but my mind is so focused on kidlit that I find myself drifting towards that voice at times. So I know it's going to be a challenge, but I'm up for it. Why not?
Yeah, it is funny because I think if there's any difference in writing YA and adult for me, it's that at least for now, at least at the onset, like my adult voice is a bit more repressed. I think just because there is a certain repression that happens in adulthood where you are expected to act a certain way and maybe not like vocalize all of your feels. You know, I think as a teen, your feels are just front and center, and especially in YA, your feels are front and center.
Yeah.
And in the adult world, I think it's funny because I think those feels and the fun moments and the sillies come out in in some conversations and don't come out in others, and maybe that difference is meant to exist. But definitely, I think in like that internal narrative, I'm actually like it's a little more controlled than maybe an Opal or a Scott or a Amir, like these characters in my YA books. Just because I think that's also related to the plot of what I'm writing about. It is that like being a 20-something-year-old who feels like you have to act a certain way, have certain friends, have a certain job, a certain relationship, all of that. I think as a teen, you're just less bogged down by the rules. And that affects your voice. So yeah, I think it's the way you think about the world and see the world and kind of like what the world's rules mean to you certainly affects your like freedom to speak and speak up. So maybe that's a difference in why an adult voice, at least for me.
Now you have me thinking, and I'm like, oh, now you got the gear spinning, and I'm like, oh, perspective. It's really, it's how they view the world.
Yeah.
And I think that affects storytelling so much. And now I'm like, oh, keep that in mind and go back when you go back to this project. Think about how that's going to work. I love that.
See, when it's the two of you, it's just like nonstop epiphanies.
Oh yeah, because otherwise, all day I'm just operating on one brain cell, and I don't. I live by myself, so it's like this is like hyper socialization time.
Right.
At least it's with you.
Adidas has an MFA, so this is kind of also our MFA workshop.
Exactly. Like I don't have any formal education in writing. I have one semester of creative writing. Yeah.
So, Mark, you said something interesting, which was you don't know if the thriller. And sorry if you don't want to keep talking about it, but
yeah,
this is where my head went. You were talking about you don't know if it's two-person or one person. How do you keep going in that instance, right? Like where you're unclear, and Arvin, obviously you can tap in about this too. Like when you're unclear about something fundamental in the book, like how do you keep making progress on it and writing it? Like, I guess like I would have to like sit down because I don't like wasting writing. If I'm sure everyone would, like a lot of writers would be like, oh, you waste a lot of writing. Like you cut it out. I'm like the things I edit out, I'll like put in a document, and I'm like, I'm going to use it later, like even though I won't. But like for you, like if you don't know if it's how many perspectives, like how do you keep going? Like are you going? Like,
yeah, no, I'm not actually. I think it's partially like an emotional thing, but I actually don't start writing a manuscript until I'm certain about all those things. I am a very strict outliner, but even beyond the outline part, like the thing that is, I need to know the ending. I need to know how it's narrated, because those are the two things I need to know before I can start a project, because I need to know where I'm going and where it ends up. And then the how is how they're telling the story. I just need to know those two things. And I'll plan the rest in an outline, but I can wing all the other parts as long as I know those two things. I need to know where I'm going. And so I know one of those with this adult story. I do know what the ending is. I'm very, very excited and thrilled to write to that point, but I haven't figured it out. So I won't start, because for me, it's not wasting words, because clearly I do that already, because I can't write in any fucking right genre ever. I'm not worried about that. It's just that I just want, as much as I challenge myself with my writing, I gotta be on I gotta agree with how you think about it, Arvin. I gotta have fun at the end of the day. And if I don't know something as fundamental as how many points of view I'm not going to have fun writing it at all. Like, I still want to enjoy writing it. And if I'm so frustrated that I feel like this story is not coming together or whatever, I've done that too many times with projects in the past. So I figure that stuff out. Often, I mean, like going to writing retreats or calling up a friend and FaceTiming them and just like trying to talk it out. I do that a lot. And if I can feel comfortable, then it's fun. Then it's exciting. Then I can like actually move forward in the story. But I find that I don't, unless I know those main things, I just don't do it at all.
Yeah, for me, it's funny because I don't have just, I wouldn't say I fall under kind of any bucket there. Like, you know how with days, it's like there are days where you have a to-do list and you just crush your to-do list. Like every single thing, every single piece of your schedule went according to plan and you just crushed it. And there are days where you don't really have a plan, but you have like a few things you need to do and you just go through the motion of that day. And it's very just like going through the motions. And there are days where just, you know, don't turn out at all like you expected them to. Like 8 million different things come up that like you were not expecting. And so you're just kind of like putting out fires here and dealing with things there. Like that's how writing is for me. You know, like sometimes I have those like badass to-do list days where I have a really clear, detailed outline and I follow it. Sometimes I'm just kind of like doing my like 1,000 words a day for a whole week and just going through motions, and it's very kind of monotonous. And then other times I just get like it's all of the shower thoughts, all of the random 3 a.m. moments of inspirations, and like my plot and my book are just going in all these directions that I didn't expect. And I cannot, it's funny because I feel like as writers we're expected to have a process, and I cannot for the life of me tell you which of those is my process. It will work somehow. Some of those different days come together and create the life that is each book. So that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And what a great way to end. So we're basically out of time. I want to take some time to thank Christian and Lexi from Astoria Bookshop for organizing this. Christian made the graphics and is always our point person on this. And then Lexi has been helping us out through the tech stuff tonight. So thank you guys so much for doing that for us. And I want to thank everyone who's tuning in and listening to these two people, authors, writers, icons, queer legends, talk about their practices and their books. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you guys want to see some other shop talks, again, I wanted to do these panels because oftentimes queer writers of color, queer writers of color are only asked to do panels on identity stuff and representation and diversity. And I wanted a chance for us to talk about craft and writing and doing what we actually do, you know. So if you want to see some more shop talks, they have been recorded. They are on YouTube. Our first shop talk was amazing. It's with Case and Cullender, who we mentioned, and they are amazing, along with Leah Johnson and Adib Karam, who, you know, just those two everyone loves. And then our second shop talk was Elsie Rosen and Abdi Nazemian, who wrote incredible books, Jack of Hearts and Other Parts, and like Love Story, one of my faves. But yeah, so thank you for tuning in. There are other shop talks. And then, last but not least, I want to thank you two again for doing this with me, talking with me, sitting through my rambling, and imparting wisdom, as always.
Trying to. Thank you for setting this up, for moderating. Shout out to JR on YouTube. I see JR is awesome. You should follow him on YouTube.
Yes.
JR is great. Hi, JR. Yeah, thank you for letting us do this. You're right. Like, I mean, I've done like 6 diversity panels in the last 2 weeks, and I'm just like, can I just talk about books, like, and word count? Like, I never get to talk about this stuff, like, never. So thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
It's glad to do it. And we shall see when we get taken off air. I always forget at the end. I'm like, how does this happen again? I think he's in charge of that, and so we'll just kind of.
Thanks to Story Bookshop. You're lovely.
I wish you were open.
No.